"That's not him in the casket," the little street urchin cried out during the millionaire's son's wake. Everyone rushed closer, and when they opened the lid, the truth was revealed. "Please leave a comment rating my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help." The scream that shattered the solemn silence of the funeral home chapel echoed off the marble walls like lightning through a storm. The 4-year-old street kid, with her matted hair and tattered clothes hanging loosely on her thin frame, burst through the central aisle as all the mourners turned in shock. "That's not him! That boy is not Mr. Vanderbilt's son!" the child shrieked, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor as she ran towards the open casket. The widowed millionaire remained motionless in his front row seat, his red-rimmed eyes fixed on the small, serene face resting among the white flowers. At 30 years old, he had built a business empire spanning the entire industrial metropolis, amassing a fortune in Wall Street stocks that few could imagine. His net worth in dollars had grown exponentially after shrewd investments in tech and real estate, but none of that mattered now. His only son, his reason for living since losing his wife, lay there, silent forever. The cruel stepmother, elegantly dressed in black, rose in indignation. Her cold eyes gleamed with controlled fury as she signaled for the security guards to remove the intruder. "Get that child out of here immediately! How dare you allow a beggar to disrupt such a sacred moment?" But the little girl was not intimidated. Her large, determined eyes scanned the face in the casket before turning to the devastated man. "Sir, please listen to me. Your boy had a tiny scar right here," she said, touching her own forehead. "A very thin one that he got when he fell off his bike in Central Park. He told me you were scared he'd need stitches." The millionaire felt the world spin. No one knew about that specific scar. It was so subtle that only the closest family knew its origin. Even the medical examiners had not mentioned anything about old marks in the accident report. "How do you know that?" he whispered, his hoarse voice breaking the tense silence of the chapel. The street kid moved closer, ignoring the hostile stares of those present. "Because he was my friend. Every day, when he got out of school, he would stop in the park and share his lunch with me. He told me stories and showed me the drawings he made. He said that his dad worked a lot, but one day they were going to travel together to see the ocean." Tears began to stream down the businessman's face. Those details were true. His son had indeed asked to visit the beach in recent weeks, a dream he had repeatedly postponed due to work commitments. "That boy doesn't have the scar," continued the child, pointing to the body in the casket. "And the fingers are different. Your boy had a birthmark on his left hand, right here," she showed her own hand. "This one doesn't." The millionaire's heart raced. With trembling hands, he approached the casket and carefully examined the child's face. The street kid was right. There was no scar on the forehead, and when he checked his hands, the small birthmark he knew so well simply wasn't there. "This is impossible," murmured the stepmother, her voice filled with a tension she couldn't completely hide. "The identification was done by the city morgue. The documents are all correct." But the millionaire could no longer hear anything but the blood rushing in his ears. With a desperate movement, he picked up the phone and called the director of the morgue directly, his influence and fortune ensuring they answered immediately. "I want a complete verification of the identification of my son's body. Now. I don't care what time it is." As they waited, the little street urchin remained beside the businessman, her presence strangely comforting amidst the emotional chaos that gripped everyone. She held a small, crumpled piece of paper in her pocket, a drawing the boy had made for her days before the accident, a drawing of 2 birds flying together, which she kept as her most precious treasure. The stepmother watched the child's every move with calculating eyes, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. There was something in those eyes that didn't match the grief of an afflicted mother, something cold and calculated that the street kid, even at 4 years old, could sense. When the phone rang an hour later, the silence in the chapel was deafening. The voice of the morgue director trembled on the other end of the line. "Mr. Vanderbilt, I need you to come here immediately. There has been a terrible error in our records. The body being waked does not match the identification provided. The Millionaire's world collapsed and rebuilt itself in a matter of seconds. His son was alive. Somewhere in the city, his child was alive, and a little street kid with an extraordinary memory had just saved the most precious life he knew." But as hope exploded in his chest, a sinister question began to form in his mind. How exactly had this confusion happened at the morgue, and why did his stepmother seem more shaken by the discovery of the truth than relieved by the possibility of her stepson being alive? The desperate race to the public hospital on the outskirts of the city lasted 40 minutes through the chaotic metropolis traffic. The millionaire drove with sweaty hands on the steering wheel, while the little street kid sat in the back seat, tightly holding the crumpled drawing she had kept in her pocket. The stepmother had insisted on accompanying them, claiming concern, but remained strangely silent throughout the trip. "Why didn't you tell me about your friendship with my son?" asked the businessman, looking at the child through the rearview mirror. "He told me not to tell anyone," replied the girl in her small voice. "He said the adults wouldn't understand, that they would stop him from giving me food because I live on the street." The man's heart clenched. His son, at 8 years old, already showed a compassion that he himself had lost amidst the incessant pursuit of profit and expansion of his business. While he accumulated dividends and investments, his child developed a secret friendship with someone who needed help. Upon arriving at the hospital, chaos reigned in the overcrowded corridors. The millionaire had never set foot in a public health unit, always resorting to the best private hospitals his capital could buy. The smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat and despair instantly nauseated him. "I need to speak with the person in charge of the emergency sector," he said to an overworked nurse who barely looked up from her paperwork. "The line is over there, sir." "Like everyone else," she replied, pointing to a corridor crowded with people waiting for care. It was then that the stepmother demonstrated some usefulness for the first time, using her manipulative charm to get a conversation with the on-call doctor. After a few minutes of negotiation, they were taken to the ward, where children in serious condition occupied makeshift beds in the corridors. "We have an unidentified child admitted for 3 days," explained the doctor, a tired man who clearly hadn't slept in hours. "Serious traffic accident. Head trauma, multiple fractures. Was without documents when he arrived." The millionaire felt his legs weaken when he saw the boy in the hospital bed. Even with his face swollen from injuries and covered in bandages, it was undeniably his son. The small scar on his forehead was there, visible under the dressing, and the birthmark on his left hand confirmed what the street kid had said. "My God," he whispered, approaching the bed. "How long has he been unconscious?" "Since he arrived. The injuries are serious, but there are signs of gradual improvement. The problem is that without identification, he is receiving only the basic treatment we can offer here." The stepmother watched the scene with an expression she tried to mold into relief, but the little street kid noticed something strange. The woman didn't seem surprised to see the boy's condition, as if she already knew exactly how severe the injuries were. "We need to transfer him immediately to the best private hospital in the city," declared the millionaire, already picking up the phone to make the necessary calls. "Wait," interrupted the doctor. "There is something else you need to know. When the boy arrived here, a nurse tried to contact the family through the school records found in his backpack. But someone called the hospital claiming to be a relative and reported that the family had already been notified about the fatal accident." The blood ran cold in the businessman's veins. "Someone called? Who?" "A woman. Said she was the child's aunt. Provided correct information about the family, so we assumed it was legitimate. That's why we stopped trying to contact." The millionaire turned slowly to the stepmother, who had visibly paled. "You knew," he murmured, his voice carrying a growing fury. "You knew he was alive, and you didn't tell me." "That's ridiculous," she protested, but her voice trembled. "How would I know something like that? I'm as shocked as you are." But the little street urchin approached the businessman and tugged at his sleeve. "Sir, I saw her on the phone on the day of the accident. She was on the street near your house and she was talking to someone. She said that the problem would be solved and that no one would question it if it was quick." The stepmother laughed with forced nervousness. "A street child making up stories. Who's going to believe that?" But the doctor frowned, consulting his notes. "Now that I think about it, it was strange indeed. The woman who called seemed very specific about the details of the accident, as if she already knew exactly what had happened. And she insisted a lot that we shouldn't try to contact the family anymore." The millionaire began to connect the sinister dots forming in his mind. His fortune was considerable. Investments in gold, diversified investments, a company worth millions. With the supposed loss of his son, he had become vulnerable, and the stepmother, as his wife of 2 years, would be well positioned to inherit everything if something happened to him too. "I want all records of these calls," he demanded, his voice gaining the authoritative tone he used in business meetings. "And I want to know exactly who authorized the interruption of attempts to contact the family." As the doctor left to retrieve the documents, the stepmother approached the bed where the boy lay unconscious. For a moment, her mask of concern slipped completely, revealing an expression of genuine frustration. "You should have died," she whispered softly, thinking no one was listening. But the street kid had a keen hearing, developed from years of surviving on the streets. Her eyes widened as she heard those cruel words, and she instinctively positioned herself between the stepmother and the boy's bed. "What did you say?" asked the millionaire, who had noticed the child's defensive movement. "I said thank God he didn't die," lied the stepmother quickly, but the damage was already done. At that moment, a nurse ran into the room. "Doctor, we have a serious problem. The morgue identification records have been tampered with. Someone intentionally switched the forms, and there is evidence that documents were falsified." The millionaire looked at the stepmother, then at the little street kid who had saved his son's life, and finally at the unconscious child in the bed. The truth was beginning to unfold in a terrifying way. His wife was not just an ambitious woman, she was a person capable of letting a child die to get an inheritance. But as he processed this horrible revelation, the boy's heart monitor began to beep erratically. Doctors rushed to the bed, and the millionaire realized with growing horror that even though he had found his son alive, the battle for the child's life was just beginning. And now he knew that there was someone very close who would rather see him lose that battle. 2 weeks had passed since the discovery, and the boy had been transferred to the most reputable private hospital in the metropolis. The millionaire had sold some of his stock to ensure his son received the best medical care available, even if it meant a considerable reduction in his net worth. Each day cost a fortune, but he didn't care. His wealth only made sense if it could save the most important life to him. The little street kid visited daily, always accompanied by a social worker whom the businessman had hired especially to take care of her. The child had refused to go to a temporary shelter, insisting that she needed to stay close to her friend. She slept in a chair in the private room, always holding the crumpled drawing that the boy had made for her. "He's going to wake up today," she said on Tuesday morning, with a conviction that surprised the doctors. Her photographic memory was not limited only to the things she saw. She also memorized patterns, sounds, and subtle changes that others did not notice. The doctor in charge of the case, a renowned neurologist, had explained that the brain injuries were serious but not irreversible. It's a matter of time and how his brain will react. Some patients wake up in days, others take months. The stepmother continued her daily visits, perfectly playing the role of the worried wife. But the millionaire had begun to notice inconsistencies in her behavior. She asked very specific medical questions about the prognosis, as if she were calculating chances instead of simply hoping for recovery. "Did the doctors say anything about permanent after effects?" she asked that morning as she watched the monitors. "Why are you asking that?" replied the businessman, studying her face. "I just want to know what to expect, to prepare myself psychologically," she lied. But her eyes revealed an anxiety that didn't match maternal sadness. It was then that the little street kid made an observation that would change everything. "Sir, why does she always ask about wills when she thinks no one is listening?" The millionaire turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "Yesterday, when you left to talk to the doctor, she called someone. She said she needed to know how much time she had to resolve the will situation, and that the boy couldn't wake up before that was settled." The revelation was like a punch to the gut. The businessman recalled that 2 months before the accident, the stepmother had repeatedly suggested that he update his will, claiming it was important to have everything organized for business security reasons. "Where are the papers I signed at the lawyer's office?" he asked, a growing urgency in his voice. "I keep everything at our place," the stepmother replied quickly, "for safekeeping." But something about the way she said "our place" bothered him deeply. Since when did she refer to the mansion he had bought years before meeting her as her property too? That afternoon, while the stepmother had left claiming to have important appointments, the miracle that the street kid had predicted happened. The boy slowly opened his eyes, looking confused around the room full of medical equipment. "Dad," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. The millionaire burst into tears, holding his son's small hand with all the care in the world. "I'm here, my boy. You're safe now. Where's my friend?" "The girl with the drawings?" The little street kid approached the bed, her eyes shining with emotion. "I'm here. I kept your drawing with me all the time." The boy smiled weakly, but then his expression became serious. "Dad, I remember some things. Before the accident, I overheard Aunt Carol talking on the phone. She was angry, saying that I was an obstacle and that she needed to solve the problem once and for all." The businessman's blood ran cold. "Are you sure about what you heard?" "Yes, and she was talking about money, about inheritance. She said that when I wasn't getting in the way anymore, she could finally enjoy the fortune she deserved." The little street kid nodded vigorously. "I heard her say those things too, but no one believed me because I'm just a kid from the street." At that moment, the millionaire made a decision that would change everything. He called his personal lawyer and demanded an urgent meeting to review all the documents he had signed recently. He also contacted a private investigator he had used before for corporate investigations. "I want to know everything about my wife, Carol. Past, family, financial history, everything." While making these calls, he didn't notice that the stepmother had returned earlier than expected and was listening to the conversation from the hallway. Her eyes narrowed dangerously as she understood that her deception was being discovered. 3 days later, the detective brought information that shocked the businessman to his core. The woman he had married was not only ambitious, she had a sinister history that he had never imagined. "She's been married 3 times before," reported the investigator. "All the husbands were wealthy, older men with children from previous relationships. In all cases, the stepchildren suffered serious accidents or medical complications shortly after the marriage. And the husbands? 2 died in suspicious circumstances after altering their wills. The third discovered the truth in time and managed to annul the marriage, but she disappeared with a considerable amount of money before she could be prosecuted." The millionaire felt nauseous. He had brought a predator into his home, putting his son in mortal danger without even realizing it. "There's more," continued the detective. "I found evidence that she bribed hospital and morgue employees in other cities. She has a network of contacts specializing in manipulating medical and death records." The terrible truth was revealed in all its extent. His son's accident had not been accidental. The stepmother had orchestrated everything, from the collision to the confusion at the morgue, hoping that the child would die in the public hospital while everyone believed she had already passed. But her plan had failed due to the exceptional memory and courage of a little street kid who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. Now, while his son slowly recovered, the millionaire faced a terrifying reality. The woman who slept beside him every night was a potential killer, and he needed to protect his family before she realized that her lies had been discovered. But when he arrived home that night, he found the stepmother waiting for him in the living room with an expression he had never seen before, cold, calculating, and dangerously calm. She knew that he knew the truth, and now there was no more need to pretend. "So you found out," said the stepmother, her voice devoid of any pretense. She was sitting in the leather armchair in the living room, holding a glass of red wine as if it were a casual social gathering. "Took you longer than I expected. Rich men are usually smarter." The millionaire remained standing in the doorway, mentally calculating the distance to the phone. "You tried to kill my son." "I tried to solve a problem," she corrected coldly. "You're 42, I'm 35. When you die naturally, or not so naturally, I'll still have decades to enjoy all this wealth. But with an heir in the way, the situation becomes complicated." "You're insane." She laughed, an icy sound that echoed through the empty mansion. "I'm practical. In 5 years of strategic marriages, I've accumulated more capital than most people see in their entire lives. Your bitcoins, your investments in gold, your diversified funds, all of that would be mine if you weren't so sentimental about that kid." The businessman felt anger burning in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He needed concrete evidence to end this once and for all. "How did you manage to arrange the accident?" "It was easier than I imagined. I paid a desperate driver to cause the collision unintentionally." He thought it would be just a simulated accident for insurance fraud. When he realized there was a child involved, he wanted to back out. But I already had compromising material on him. "And the morgue. I have useful contacts. A nurse in debt, a morgue employee with expensive vices, a medical examiner who needed money to support his family. Everyone has a price." She took another sip of the wine, savoring each word. "The plan was perfect. Your son would die in the public hospital due to lack of proper care. You would be devastated and vulnerable, and I would be the sympathetic widow inheriting a fortune. But the street kid found out." The stepmother's face contorted in genuine hatred. "That pest should have been dead a long time ago." "But no, you brought her into our life, giving attention to a child who has no value whatsoever while neglecting your own wife." At that moment, the millionaire realized something terrible. She wasn't just confessing, she was saying goodbye. There was something in her posture, in the way she held the glass, that suggested this conversation had a final purpose. "You put something in the wine," he murmured, beginning to feel a subtle dizziness. "In the air, actually. A discreet vaporizer that I installed earlier today. You should be starting to feel the effects now." She smiled with cruel satisfaction. "It'll look like a heart attack. The stress of almost losing your son, the pressure of business, your age, no one will question it." The businessman's legs began to fail him, but he fought against the impending faint. With the last shred of strength, he managed to send a text message he had prepared for the detective. "Now, house. Emergency." The stepmother didn't notice the movement, too busy savoring her victory. "When you're gone, I'll be the devastated widow who needs time to recover. I'll sell the companies gradually, transfer the assets to offshore accounts, and in 2 years, I'll be living comfortably in another country with a new identity. And my son. Accidents happen in hospitals, equipment fails, medications are switched." She shrugged with absolute indifference. "This time, there won't be an inconvenient street kid to ruin my plans." But at that very moment, sirens began to sound outside. The detective had arrived with a team of paramedics and investigators, alerted by the emergency message and the evidence they had collected in recent days. The front door burst open violently, and uniformed men stormed into the room. The stepmother tried to run, but tripped over her own arrogance. She had underestimated the planning capacity of the man she was trying to eliminate. "She confessed everything," murmured the millionaire before fainting, pointing to the digital recorder he had hidden in his pocket and activated at the beginning of the conversation. 3 months later, life had found a new balance. The boy had fully recovered from his injuries, returning to school with a renewed appreciation for life and friendship. The little street kid, now officially under the care of a foster family carefully selected by the millionaire, lived in a house near his and visited daily. But the greatest transformation had happened in the businessman himself. The experience of almost losing his son and discovering the truth about his wife had changed him deeply. He sold much of his business and investments, keeping only enough to live comfortably, and decided to devote his time to what really mattered. "Dad, can I take my friend to Central Park today?" asked the boy during breakfast. "Of course, but this time I'm coming along," replied the father, smiling. "I have free time now." The little street kid, now with clean clothes and well-fed, still carried with her the crumpled drawing of the 2 birds flying together. But now it was framed on the wall of her new room, a reminder of how courage and truth can transform the most desperate situations. The stepmother was convicted of attempted murder and fraud, and was also investigated for previous cases in other cities. Her network of corrupt contacts was dismantled, and other families who had suffered suspicious losses finally got answers to their questions. The millionaire discovered that true wealth was not measured in dollars, stocks, or financial investments. It was in his son's laughter in the park, in the colorful drawings that the little ex-street kid made to decorate his refrigerator, and in the simple days when he could be just a present father instead of a businessman obsessed with profits. One afternoon, while watching the 2 children playing in the garden of his home, he reflected on how a little 4-year-old street kid had saved not only his son's life, but also his own soul. She had taught a multimillionaire that sometimes the most valuable people are those that society considers invisible. And as the sun set over the great industrial metropolis, 3 people who had found each other amidst chaos and betrayal could finally look to the future with hope, knowing that the family they built together was stronger than any fortune that money could buy. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a score of 0 to 10, and thank you very much.